The hall was filled with soft chatter, the kind that floats around before a performance begins. People were adjusting their seats, whispering about who might perform next. On one side of the stage, a group of music students stood together, holding their instruments, laughing and nudging each other. They all seemed confident, polished, and sure of themselves. At the far corner of the hall, a young girl quietly entered, holding onto her mother's arm. Her steps were slow, careful, almost hesitant. Her eyes didn't move like everyone else's. They stayed still, calm, yet aware in their own way. The girl couldn't see, but she could hear everything. Every whisper, every nervous breath, every shuffle of feet. To her, sound was her sight. She wasn't part of the official lineup of performers that evening. Her mother had only brought her there to listen, to feel the atmosphere of music, something she deeply loved. But the moment she heard the faint echo of the piano from across the stage, something inside her pulled her toward it. Her mother tried to stop her gently. "Maybe later, dear," she whispered. But the girl smiled softly and shook her head. "Just for a moment," she said. Her voice was small but full of calm confidence. She slowly made her way toward the stage, guided by the sound of her own steps. The room grew quieter as people noticed her walking toward the grand piano that stood proudly under the spotlight. The piano's black surface reflected the stage lights, and its lid was open, waiting for someone to play. But the sight of the blind girl approaching it caused murmurs to rise among the audience. "Who is she?" someone asked quietly. "Is she lost?" another whispered. A boy from the music group chuckled. "Maybe she thinks she can play," he said, loud enough for others to hear. His friends laughed. One of them added, "Well, this should be interesting." The girl, hearing the faint laughter, paused for a second. Her hand tightened around the edge of the stage. Her mother stood frozen, unsure whether to pull her back or let her go. But then the girl reached out her hand, found the edge of the piano, and gently touched its surface. The texture of the polished wood felt familiar. Her fingers brushed over the keys, light and careful, as though greeting an old friend. "Hey, careful," the same boy said mockingly. "That's an expensive piano. It's not a toy." The room filled with quiet laughter again. The girl didn't reply. She simply ran her fingertips across the keys, feeling their smoothness, remembering their shape, their warmth, the way sound used to rise from them like whispers of her past. A tall man with a serious face, the event's piano instructor, stepped forward. "Young lady," he said, his tone firm but not cruel, "this is a performance event. Are you supposed to be here?" The girl turned her head toward his voice. "No, sir," she said softly. "I just wanted to touch it. I like the way it sounds." The man frowned slightly, glancing at the crowd. "It's not just about touching, young lady. This is an instrument of discipline. It takes years to master." "I know," she said quietly. "My father used to play." There was a pause. The man looked at her again. "Used to?" She nodded. "He taught me before he went away." The instructor sighed. But before he could respond, one of the students from the group spoke up with a smirk. "If she knows how to play, let her show us," he said. His tone wasn't kind, it was mocking. "Go on, play something. Let's see what your father taught you." The audience stirred. A few people laughed again, some out of awkwardness, others because they thought it was just a harmless joke. The girl stood there quietly, her face unreadable. Her mother tried to speak up, but the girl gently raised her hand, signaling her to stop. "All right," she said simply. "Just one song." The room fell into a soft hush. The instructor raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting her to agree. "Very well," he said, "but please make it short." The girl took a slow breath and sat down on the bench. The wood creaked faintly under her weight. Her hands hovered above the keys. She took another deep breath, her fingers searching for the middle note, the one her father had taught her to find first. She found it, pressing it softly. The sound filled the air, clear, warm, alive. She smiled faintly. The laughter in the room began to fade, replaced by a strange silence. Her fingers moved again, slowly at first, almost uncertain. Then, as if something awoke inside her, they began to glide across the keys with purpose. The melody that came out was not from any sheet music. It was a song she carried deep inside her, the same one her father used to play late at night when the world was quiet, and she could sit beside him and feel each note through the vibrations under her fingertips. As she played, her expression softened. The audience could see her lips move slightly, like she was whispering to the music itself. The sound filled every corner of the hall, gentle yet powerful, emotional yet controlled. The instructor's eyes widened slightly. He leaned forward in his chair. This wasn't random playing. Her fingers moved with precision, emotion, and understanding. The melody carried sadness, hope, and memory all at once. The same students who had laughed earlier now stood frozen, their smiles gone. One of them muttered, "How is she doing that?" The girl didn't hear them anymore. She was somewhere else, in her own world where sound painted pictures and memory became music. She could almost feel her father beside her again, guiding her hands, whispering softly, "Let the piano breathe with you." She pressed the keys harder, bringing the melody to life. The hall, once filled with laughter and whispers, now sat in complete silence. Every person watched her, mesmerized. The lights reflected gently on her face, showing pure peace and focus. The song rose and fell like a heartbeat. At moments it was gentle, like a quiet stream, and then suddenly powerful, like a storm full of emotion. The sound of it carried through the air and into the hearts of everyone listening. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, one long, trembling sound that echoed through the hall before fading into silence. No one moved. No one spoke. For a few seconds, it was as if time had stopped. Then slowly, people began to breathe again. Someone in the back clapped softly. Then another joined. Soon the entire hall erupted in applause. Real, honest, emotional applause. The girl sat still for a moment, her fingers still resting on the keys. She turned her head slightly toward the sound of the clapping. Her lips curled into a small, humble smile. Her mother, who had been standing near the stage with tears in her eyes, covered her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. The instructor, who had watched every second, stood up. He didn't clap at first. He simply stared at her with disbelief and then slowly nodded, a silent sign of respect. When the applause finally began to fade, he stepped closer to the piano. "What was that piece?" he asked gently. "It's not written anywhere," she said quietly. "It's just something my father used to play when he wanted me to smile." The man blinked, trying to find words. "You have a gift," he said finally. "A rare one." The girl smiled again, her voice soft but sure. "It's not a gift," she said. "It's a memory." The audience was still watching her, many with tears in their eyes. What had started as laughter ended as awe. The students who had mocked her earlier looked down, ashamed, their arrogance replaced with silence. The girl stood up, feeling her way to the edge of the piano. She bowed slightly toward the sound of the crowd. "Thank you," she whispered. Her mother took her hand again, and they walked slowly off the stage together. As they reached the door, the girl stopped for a moment and turned her head back toward the piano. The room was still clapping. She smiled once more, whispering softly under her breath, "Did you hear that, Dad?" Then she left the stage, leaving behind not just the echo of her music, but a memory that everyone there would never forget. From that night on, no one in that hall ever looked at her the same way again. The sound of clapping still echoed in her mind long after the performance ended. As she and her mother walked out of the music hall that night, the air felt lighter somehow, almost alive. The girl couldn't see the stars above, but she could feel their presence. Every sound around her felt brighter, every heartbeat softer. For the first time in years, she felt proud, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had done what she came for. She had played her father's song. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. The girl smiled. "He would have been proud too," she said softly. They didn't say his name. They didn't need to. The piano had spoken for him. When they reached home, the house felt strangely quiet. The old upright piano stood near the window, covered in a thin layer of dust. It had been months since she last touched it. Her mother had stopped encouraging her to play after her father's death. It had been too painful for both of them, but tonight that silence broke. The girl walked straight to the piano, lifted the cover, and pressed a single key. The sound was slightly out of tune, but it still filled the room like a heartbeat. She smiled. "I think it missed me," she said. Her mother chuckled softly, wiping her eyes. The next morning, she woke up early. She didn't need to see the sunlight to know it was morning. She could feel it through the warmth on her skin. After breakfast, her mother received a call from someone. Her tone changed as she listened, surprised and unsure. When she hung up, she turned toward her daughter. "That was the instructor from last night," she said slowly. He wants to meet you." The girl tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Her mother smiled faintly. "He said he couldn't stop thinking about your performance. He wants to talk to you about something." A few days later, they returned to the same hall, but this time the mood was different. People greeted them kindly. The same students who had laughed before now looked nervous when she passed by. Some even offered awkward smiles, unsure how to make up for what they had done. She didn't hold it against them. She just nodded politely. Inside the main room, the instructor was waiting. His face was softer this time, his voice calm and respectful. "You played from the heart," he said. "I've been teaching music for over 20 years, but I've never seen anyone play the way you did." The girl smiled faintly. "I just play what I feel," he nodded. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I want to help you develop your talent. You have a gift, and I'd like to train you, and if you're willing." Her mother's eyes widened slightly. "You mean lessons?" "Yes," he said. "Private lessons, no fee. I just want to help her reach her potential." The girl stood silent for a moment, surprised. She had never imagined anyone would offer to teach her again, especially not someone who had once doubted her, but she could feel the sincerity in his voice. She smiled. "I'd love that," she said. From that day, her lessons began. Every week she would arrive early at the hall, cane in hand, ready to learn. The instructor guided her not through sight, but through sound and feeling, the same way her father had. He learned quickly that she had an extraordinary ear. She could identify every note, every subtle change in tone just by listening. Sometimes he would play a complex piece and ask her to repeat it. Without hesitation, she would place her hands on the keys and play it back almost perfectly. It left him speechless more than once. "You're hearing music the way most people can only dream of," he told her one afternoon. She smiled shyly. "It's how I see the world," she said. Her reputation slowly began to spread around town. People who had attended that first event started talking about the blind girl who played like she had the soul of 10 pianists inside her. Some thought it was exaggerated, but those who heard her knew it was true. A few months later, the instructor told her about an upcoming competition in the city, a major piano event that drew talented players from all over the region. "You should enter," he said. She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready," she replied. "They're all professionals," he smiled. "You don't need to see the notes to understand them. You already have what many players spend a lifetime trying to find: emotion. Just share that with them." After a few days of thought, she agreed. It wasn't because she wanted fame or recognition. She just wanted to play again, to share her father's music with more people. The weeks leading up to the competition were intense. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours, her fingers sore and her back aching, but she didn't complain. Every note felt like a step closer to something she couldn't quite name. Maybe peace, maybe purpose. Her mother would sit quietly nearby, listening, sometimes crying without realizing it. "You bring life into this house again," she told her one night. When the day of the competition arrived, the girl and her mother traveled to the city together. The hall was massive, bigger than anything she had imagined. The sound of hundreds of people talking, the echo of footsteps, the deep hum of anticipation. It all felt overwhelming yet thrilling. Her instructor met her backstage, helping her find her seat. "Remember," he whispered, "don't play for them. Play for yourself and then for him," she nodded. She knew exactly what he meant. When it was finally her turn, the announcer called her name. The hall fell quiet. She walked slowly toward the piano, her cane tapping softly against the stage floor. The air felt heavy with expectation. Some people in the audience whispered when they saw her, unsure what to think. She sat down, took a deep breath, and rested her hands on the keys. The same warmth filled her fingertips, the same comfort she had felt that first night. She pressed the first note, and once again, the hall seemed to stop breathing. Her performance began softly, like a whisper. The melody was delicate, emotional, and filled with life. Each note carried weight, telling a story of loss, love, and hope. She played not for applause, not for attention, but to speak through the only language she truly understood: music. The sound rose and fell, building like a wave of emotion. The audience watched in complete silence. Some closed their eyes just to feel it better. The judges sat frozen, their pens motionless. Halfway through the performance, her mother, sitting in the crowd, held her breath. She could almost hear her husband's song within the melody, the one he used to play for them both. It was as if the girl had brought his spirit back through her hands. When the final note came, it lingered in the air, soft and endless. The silence that followed was so deep it almost felt holy, and then applause. Not polite clapping, but thunderous applause that filled every corner of the hall. Tears streamed down her mother's face. The instructor stood up, clapping harder than anyone. Even the judges were visibly moved, exchanging looks that said everything words couldn't. The girl bowed her head slightly. "Thank you," she said softly into the microphone, her voice calm, humble, and full of emotion. "This song was for my father." Later that evening, when the results were announced, she didn't care much about winning. But when they called her name as the first-place winner, she stood still, shocked. The audience rose to their feet again. As she accepted the award, she turned toward where she imagined her mother was sitting. "He would have been proud," she whispered with a small smile. That night, as they drove home, her mother asked her quietly, "How did it feel up there?" The girl thought for a moment, then replied, "It felt like I was home again." From that day on, her life began to change. Invitations came in from schools, music festivals, and charity events. People wanted to hear the girl who played with her heart instead of her eyes, but she stayed humble. She still practiced on her old piano every morning. She still played her father's songs before every event, as a silent thank you to the man who taught her how to listen to the world. What started as a moment of mockery had become something far greater, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices belong to those the world overlooks, and every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered that first night, the laughter, the silence, the applause, and how, with one simple note, she turned disbelief into wonder. The sound of applause from that night in the city competition stayed with her for a long time. Even days later, when she sat quietly at her piano at home, she could still hear it echoing in her memory. For most people, applause fades quickly, but for her, it was more than just sound. It was a heartbeat, a reminder that she had finally shared her father's music with the world. After the competition, her life began to change in small but meaningful ways. People who once passed her without a glance now stopped to talk. Neighbors congratulated her mother at the grocery store. Children from nearby streets came by asking if they could hear her play. She never refused anyone. Whenever someone asked, she would smile and say, "Sit down and listen. I'll play something for you." She didn't care about fame or success. She cared about the feeling music brought, the peace it gave her, and the joy it spread to others. Soon letters started to arrive. Some were from schools inviting her to perform. Others came from people she'd never met, strangers who had heard about her story through newspapers and local radio. They wrote about how her courage inspired them, how her music gave them hope when they needed it most. Her mother read every letter aloud to her. Sometimes they both cried quietly as the words filled their small living room. One letter came from a music academy in the city, the same one that had once turned her away when she applied as a child because of her blindness. The letter was from the director himself. He wrote that he had heard her competition performance and wanted to offer her a full scholarship to study there. When her mother finished reading it, the girl sat in silence for a long time. "That's the same school that said I couldn't learn," she said softly. Her mother nodded. "Yes, but they see you differently now." The girl smiled faintly. "Maybe they finally learned to listen." A few weeks later, she began attending the academy. It wasn't easy at first. The campus was large and busy, full of confident students rushing between classes. Many of them came from wealthy families and had been trained by private tutors since they were children. Some greeted her warmly, but others whispered things she could still hear. Soft enough to think she wouldn't notice, but she did. "She's blind. How can she even read the notes?" One said. "She probably just memorizes everything," another muttered. She didn't respond. Instead, she spent her time practicing. The piano room became her world, a space where everything made sense. She couldn't read sheet music, so she listened carefully to recordings and remembered every sound. The teachers quickly realized her gift wasn't just rare, it was extraordinary. She could listen to a complex piece once and then play it perfectly. Her main instructor, a kind older woman who had once performed on grand stages, admired her deeply. "You don't need eyes to see music," she told her one afternoon. You already see it better than most people. The girl's confidence grew with each passing day. Yet she never forgot where she came from, or how people once laughed when she touched that first piano. Whenever she walked past a new student struggling with notes, she would stop and offer gentle advice. "Don't fight the music," she'd say softly. "Let it speak to you." Months went by and the Academy announced an important event, an annual concert where the best students would perform before judges and guests from across the country. The pressure was enormous. Winning could open doors to international competitions and scholarships abroad. Her teacher encouraged her to participate. "You should share your music again," she said. "Not to win, but to remind people why they fell in love with it in the first place." The girl hesitated. "What if they don't understand my style?" she asked. Her teacher smiled. "Then you'll teach them something new," she agreed. But preparing for the concert wasn't easy. She spent long nights practicing alone in the quiet hall after everyone had left. Sometimes her fingers trembled from exhaustion. Sometimes she made mistakes and had to start over again. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered her father's voice in her mind. Gentle, calm, always the same. Music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. On the day of the concert, the hall was filled with people from all over. The audience was elegant, dressed in suits and gowns. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and nerves. Each performer was given only 10 minutes on stage. She waited backstage, her hands folded in her lap. Her heart beat fast, but her face remained calm. Her teacher stood beside her, whispering, "Just breathe. They're waiting to hear your heart, not your hands." When her turn came, an assistant led her to the stage. The crowd went quiet. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. But she wasn't afraid. She found the bench, sat down, and took a slow, deep breath. Her hands found the keys as if guided by memory. The moment she touched them, the world around her disappeared. The piece she chose wasn't one of her father's songs this time. It was her own, something she had written secretly over the last few months. It was about her journey, her pain, her growth, and her love for the man who had first taught her what music meant. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper. Then it rose, telling a story without words. The notes carried both sorrow and strength, the kind that comes from overcoming something no one believed you could. As she played, people in the audience leaned forward, completely silent. Even those who had doubted her earlier sat frozen. The sound was pure emotion, honest and raw. It wasn't about showing skill. It was about touching hearts. When the last note finally faded, there was a stillness so deep that she could hear someone in the front row quietly sniffle. Then came the applause, gentle at first, then louder, growing into a wave that filled the hall. Her teacher wiped a tear from her cheek. The judges exchanged glances, some even standing to clap. The girl, unaware of the standing ovation, simply bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you." That performance changed everything. The next day, her story spread beyond the Academy. Newspapers wrote about the blind pianist who made an audience cry. Videos of her performance circulated online. People across the country shared her story, calling her an inspiration. But while the world celebrated her, she stayed the same, humble, kind, quiet. She still practiced every morning in the same small room. When people asked her how it felt to be famous, she always said the same thing. "I'm not famous. I'm just playing for someone who can't hear me anymore." One evening, as she sat by the piano, her teacher visited her. "You've come so far," the teacher said. "Have you ever thought about performing beyond our country? There are competitions in Europe, America. You could go anywhere." The girl paused. "Maybe someday," she said softly. "But for now, I want to stay here. I want to play for the people who first laughed at me. Maybe they'll hear something different this time." Her teacher smiled warmly. "They already do," she said. Weeks later, she returned to the same community hall where everything had begun, the place where she was once mocked for touching a piano. It looked smaller now, yet somehow more special. She sat at the same spot on the stage, her fingers brushing the same keys that had changed her life. The crowd that gathered this time was full of familiar faces, some from the audience that had laughed before, some new ones who had come after hearing her story. When she started to play, there was no laughter, no whispers, just silence, pure and deep. And in that silence, her music spoke again, louder than any words could. By the time she finished, many in the room were in tears. The same boy who had mocked her years ago came forward, his voice shaky. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She smiled gently. "Don't be," she replied. "If you hadn't laughed, I might never have played." That night, as she left the hall, the air was cool and still. Her mother walked beside her, holding her arm. The girl tilted her face upward, feeling the breeze against her skin. "I think he's still listening," she whispered. Her mother squeezed her hand. "He always will," she said softly. And for the first time in a long while, the girl felt completely at peace. Not because the world finally saw her, but because she had finally learned to see herself through her music. Her music had reached places she never imagined. It was played on radios, shared on television, and even used in schools to inspire children to chase their dreams. But for her, fame never really mattered. What mattered was that people were listening, truly listening, not just to her music, but to the message inside it. She continued her studies at the academy, balancing between performances and practice. Every morning she arrived early, before the other students, to sit alone in the empty hall. The sound of her fingers brushing the keys echoed softly in the stillness. It was her quiet time, when she felt closest to her father. One day her instructor entered the hall unexpectedly. He listened quietly from the doorway as she played a melody she had composed herself. It was gentle and slow, filled with emotion, almost like a conversation between two souls. When she finished, he clapped softly. "That was beautiful," he said. "What do you call it?" She smiled faintly. "I haven't named it yet," she replied. "Maybe it doesn't need a name. It's just how I feel." He nodded. Then it already speaks for itself. Soon after, she received an invitation that would change her life again. A request to perform at an international music festival in another country. It was one of the most respected events in the world, attended by great musicians and critics. Her teacher in the academy believed she deserved to represent them. When her mother told her about the invitation, she fell silent. "Another country," she said softly. "That sounds far." Her mother smiled. "Yes, but maybe it's time. You've shared your music here. Maybe now the world should hear it too." The thought of traveling scared her. She had never been away from home or from the comfort of her familiar piano. But deep inside, she knew she couldn't turn down the chance. "All right," she finally said. "Let's go." The journey was long. The sounds of the airport, the chatter of people speaking languages she didn't understand, the rush of footsteps, everything felt new and strange. But as long as she could hear the soft hum of her mother's voice beside her, she felt safe. When they arrived, she was greeted warmly by the festival organizers. They spoke kindly, offering help at every step. "You're our special guest," one of them said. "People are very excited to hear you play." The stage where she was meant to perform was enormous, far larger than anything she had experienced. The grand piano stood under a circle of lights, polished and shining. She ran her fingers along its surface, feeling the smoothness, the coolness of the keys. "It feels alive," she whispered. Her mother smiled. "Then you'll make it sing." During rehearsals, she met other musicians from different countries. Some were friendly and curious about her blindness. Others were quiet, watching her from a distance, unsure how to approach her. One of them, a young violinist, approached her after practice. His voice was calm and warm. "I've heard your story," he said. "It's incredible." She smiled gently. "Thank you. I'm still learning." He chuckled. "We all are. That's what makes music endless." Over the next few days, they practiced together. He played the violin while she accompanied him on piano. Their sounds blended perfectly, his strings carrying her notes, her melodies guiding his bow. It was as if they spoke a language only the two of them could understand. One afternoon, while they were rehearsing, one of the festival judges happened to pass by and stopped to listen. When they finished, the judge smiled and said, "That was magic. You two should perform that together on stage." The girl turned toward the sound of his voice. "Together?" "Yes," he said. "You complement each other beautifully." The violinist agreed immediately. "It would be an honor," he said. She hesitated at first, but finally nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Let's do it." The night of the festival arrived. The audience was huge, hundreds of people seated in silence, waiting for the performances to begin. Her name was announced near the end of the program, just before the closing act. Backstage, she could feel her heart racing. The violinist placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do it like we practiced," he said. "Just breathe." She nodded, her fingers slightly trembling. When they walked onto the stage, the hall fell completely silent. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel them. The weight of their attention, the soft hum of anticipation. She sat down at the piano while the violinist stood beside her. The first note she played was light, almost fragile. The violin followed, wrapping around her melody like a thread of light. Together, they built a world made of sound, a story of friendship, courage, and faith. Every note felt alive. The audience listened without moving. Some closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. The harmony between the piano and violin felt like a conversation between hope and memory. When the final note faded, the entire hall erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the high ceilings. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. The violinist squeezed her hand gently. "You did it," he whispered. After the performance, people came backstage to congratulate them. Reporters wanted interviews, cameras flashed, and questions poured in. She smiled politely but spoke little. "I'm grateful," she kept saying, "but I just played what I felt." The next morning, news about their performance spread quickly. Articles called it the most emotional moment of the festival. One headline read, "Blind pianist and violinist create magic that moved the world." She and the violinist were invited to perform again in other countries. But despite the excitement, she began to feel something inside her, a quiet longing for home. One night, as she sat by the hotel window, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside, she turned to her mother and said softly, "It's strange. The world feels so big, yet I still miss that small hall where it all began." Her mother smiled gently. "Because that's where you found your voice," she said. The next day, before their return flight, the festival organizers asked her to record one last piece for their archives, something that would stay in their collection forever. She thought for a while and then decided to play the same melody she had written long ago, the one without a name. As she played, tears rolled down her cheeks. The notes were soft, full of love and memory. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence, deep and meaningful. She whispered quietly, "That one was for him." When they returned home, the town welcomed her with open arms. People lined the streets holding flowers and banners. It felt unreal to her, like all of this was happening to someone else. But as soon as she sat at her old piano again, everything felt normal. She smiled. "This is where I belong," she said. Her teacher visited a few days later. "You've made us proud," she said. "But more than that, you've reminded everyone what real music sounds like." The girl laughed softly. "I just followed the sound in my heart." Months passed. She continued to perform, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. But she never forgot the reason she started, to keep her father's music alive. Every performance was a conversation with him, every note a memory of his gentle guidance. One evening, as she sat in her room, her mother came in holding a letter. "It's from the violinist," she said. He had written to thank her for everything, for the friendship, for the music, and for the inspiration. He wrote, "Playing with you taught me that music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. You helped me hear it." She smiled softly and placed the letter near her piano. "Then maybe we both learned something," she whispered. As time went on, she began teaching children how to play. Some of them were blind like her, others were shy or afraid to try. She taught them all the same way her father had taught her, by touch, sound, and heart. "Don't think about what you can't do," she would tell them. Think about what you can feel. And when they finally played their first simple melodies, their faces lit up with joy. That joy was what she lived for now. Not applause, not fame, but the sound of someone finding their own music for the first time. The girl who was once mocked for touching a piano had now become the one teaching others to believe in themselves. Her journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about reminding the world that true strength doesn't come from what you see. It comes from what you feel. And as long as she had her piano, her music, and the memory of her father's voice guiding her, she knew she would never stop playing. Life seemed peaceful for her again. The world had heard her music, and her small town looked at her with pride every time she passed by. Children waved, old people smiled, and her students followed her like shadows, eager to learn from her. Yet inside her heart, she knew that music was not just about playing notes. It was about living through them. And lately, something inside her had grown quiet. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the silence after years of applause. Or maybe she missed her father more than ever. Every night she sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, waiting for the sound to come. But sometimes it didn't. It was as if her heart couldn't find the rhythm anymore. Her mother noticed the change. One evening, she walked into the room carrying a cup of tea and placed it gently beside her. "You've been sitting here for hours," she said softly. "You haven't played anything." The girl smiled faintly. "I'm listening," she whispered. "To what?" Her mother asked. "To the silence," she replied. "Sometimes silence says more than music." Her mother placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's time to rest. You've given so much of yourself to the world. It's okay to pause," but resting didn't help. Every morning she woke up feeling a strange emptiness, as if she was waiting for something, though she didn't know what it was. Weeks passed like this until one afternoon, a letter arrived at her door. It was from the same music academy where she had studied years ago. They wanted her to come back, not as a student, but as a guest mentor to guide young musicians for an upcoming concert. Her heart lifted a little. "They want me to teach?" she said, almost in disbelief. Her mother smiled proudly. "Of course they do. Who else could inspire them like you?" That night she sat by her piano again. Her fingers finally found the courage to move. The sound was soft and hesitant at first, but as she played, her heart began to fill again, with warmth, memory, and meaning. She packed her small bag the next morning and returned to the academy. The building felt familiar yet changed. New students, new sounds, but the same walls that had once heard her practice for hours. As she walked through the corridor, the young students whispered excitedly. "That's her," one said. "The blind pianist." She smiled when she heard it. "Yes," she said softly, "but I'm just someone who loves to play." The head instructor greeted her warmly. "We're honored to have you back," he said. "The students have been looking forward to meeting you." She nodded humbly. "I just hope I can help them the way this place helped me." Her first class was small, 5 students, each with different backgrounds and struggles. One of them, a quiet boy, seemed particularly shy. He kept his head low, his fingers trembling when he touched the piano keys. After the class ended, she asked him gently, "Do you like the piano?" He hesitated. "I do," he said quietly, "but I'm not good at it. I always mess up," she smiled. "Then you're already a real musician," she said. "Because music isn't about getting everything right. It's about feeling something when you play." The boy looked at her in surprise, and for the first time he smiled. Day after day, she taught her students with patience and care. She told them stories about her father, about the early days when people laughed at her, and about how the piano became her voice. The students loved her honesty and kindness. One afternoon, the head instructor approached her. "The academy wants you to perform at the final concert," he said. "The students will play too, but the closing piece should be yours." She was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't performed in months," she said softly. "That's why you should," he replied. "You have a story that still needs to be told." That night, she sat at the old grand piano in the empty hall, the same hall where she once played as a nervous young girl. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath, and then something beautiful happened. She began to play, and not a piece she had rehearsed, not something written down, but something new, something born in that moment. The melody flowed from her heart like water from a spring. It was filled with everything she had lived: joy, loss, love, pain, and peace. Unnoticed by her, one of her students had been standing outside the hall listening quietly. The music touched him deeply. He ran to tell the others, and soon, several students gathered at the door, standing in silence as their teacher filled the air with emotion. When she finished, there was no applause, only tears. The quiet boy who once said he wasn't good enough walked up to her. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he said. She smiled softly. "Then remember it," she said. "Because beauty comes from honesty. When you play, don't hide your feelings. Let them speak." The day of the final concert arrived. The hall was packed with families, teachers, and guests. The young students performed one by one, each carrying a bit of her guidance in their music. When it was finally her turn, the audience stood in anticipation. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play the same melody she had played that night in the empty hall. But this time it felt different. She could feel the energy of her students behind her, their trust and admiration surrounding her like light. The music rose and fell like waves, soft at times, powerful at others. When the final note lingered in the air, the audience stood and clapped endlessly. Some even wept. After the concert, a woman approached her, holding the hand of a little girl. "My daughter wants to learn piano," the woman said, smiling. "But she's been afraid to try." "You've changed that." The girl knelt down and said gently, "Then she's already ready. All she needs is to start." The child hugged her, and in that moment the pianist realized something she hadn't understood before. She wasn't losing her love for music. It had just changed shape. Her gift was no longer just to perform, but to pass it on. In the following months, she opened her own small music center in her town, a place for anyone who wanted to learn, especially children who couldn't afford lessons. She called it the House of Sound. People from nearby towns started sending their children there. The rooms were always filled with laughter and music. Sometimes she played with them. Other times she just listened, smiling quietly as young fingers stumbled over the keys, creating their first imperfect melodies. She often thought of her father then. How proud he would have been. She could almost hear his voice, soft and full of warmth, saying, "You've done it, my little one." But as peaceful as life became, there was still something missing, a part of her that longed to share the stage one last time. Not for applause, but for closure. One evening, she received a message from the violinist she had once played with at the festival. He was organizing a charity concert to raise funds for children's music education, and he wanted her to perform again, together, just like before. Her heart filled with emotion. She hadn't seen him in years, but she remembered every note they had played together. She smiled and whispered, "Maybe this is the moment I was waiting for." Her mother encouraged her. "You should go," she said. "It's time to remind the world again what true music sounds like." So, she agreed. The concert was set in a large theater, and the audience was filled with people from all walks of life. Musicians, families, children, and even her former students. When she walked onto the stage and heard the familiar sound of the violin tuning beside her, tears welled in her eyes. The violinist leaned close and whispered, "Just like old times." She smiled. "Yes," she said softly. "But this time it's not about proving anything. It's about giving." They began to play. The piano and violin danced together, weaving stories of time, friendship, and love. The melody rose gently, then soared. It was pure, honest, and alive. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt like eternity. And then slowly the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it. Her heart was too full. As she stood and bowed, she whispered quietly, "This one was for everyone who ever believed in me." After that final concert, her music spread once again across the world. Videos of her performance went viral, not because of the stage, the lights, or the fame, but because of the truth behind it. People said they could feel her heart in every note. Some wrote letters saying her song helped them through pain. Others said it gave them hope when they had none. But she didn't think of herself as special. She always said, "I just play what I feel, and if someone hears themselves in it, then maybe that's what music is meant for." In the months that followed, she returned home again, not to rest but to continue teaching. Her little music center had grown bigger. More children were coming, More families were joining, and every room echoed with laughter, mistakes, and learning. She loved that sound. It reminded her of her own early days when she used to fumble over the keys, and her father would chuckle softly, saying, "Even wrong notes are part of the song." Every morning, she would sit with her students, guiding them patiently. Some were shy, some were too eager, and others would get frustrated easily. But she always told them the same thing: don't try to be perfect. Just try to be honest. Her lessons weren't just about piano. She taught them how to listen, to the wind, to the rain, to their own breathing. Music is everywhere, she'd say with a smile. The piano is only one place to find it. Over time, her students began to perform in small-town events. Parents would come to watch, clapping proudly even when the songs weren't perfect. She sat in the front row, smiling and clapping for every single one of them. One evening after class, she stayed alone in the hall, running her hands over the piano keys. The old wood was warm beneath her fingers. Her mother came in quietly and said, "You've made something beautiful here." She smiled softly. "It's their home now," she said. "I just opened the door." Her mother sat beside her and asked, "Do you ever miss the stage?" The girl thought for a while. "Sometimes," she said, "but I think I'm finally where I belong. I used to play to be heard. Now I play to help others find their own sound." Life carried on gently. The music center became known across nearby towns. People called her the girl who turned silence into sound. But even though the world admired her, she lived simply. The same small house, the same piano, the same kindness that had guided her since the start. Then one winter, something unexpected happened. The local council invited her to lead a community orchestra, a group made up of children, teachers, and even older people who had once given up on music. They wanted her to bring everyone together for a special performance, a celebration of how music could unite people. She accepted with a smile. "If it's for the people," she said, "then yes." The following weeks were filled with practice sessions. The room was always busy. Children learning drums, elders trying violins, and singers warming up their voices. At first it was chaotic. The sounds clashed, the timing was off, and everyone was nervous. But she never lost patience. "Let's listen to each other," she would say gently. "Music isn't about who plays louder. It's about who listens better." Slowly, everything began to fall into place. The melodies blended, the rhythm found its heart, and the orchestra started to sound whole. People from the town would peek through the windows to watch rehearsals. They were amazed at how she guided everyone not by sight, but by feeling. Her head tilted slightly as if she could see the music in the air. One evening, a little girl from the group came up to her and asked, "How do you know when it sounds right if you can't see us?" She smiled softly and said, "Because I can feel when everyone is together. Music has a heartbeat. You just have to trust it." The concert day came quickly. The hall was full with every seat taken. People who had once mocked her, doubted her, and whispered behind her back were now sitting in the same room, waiting to hear her lead the orchestra. As the lights dimmed, she walked to the front, her white cane tapping gently on the floor. The crowd grew silent. She sat down at the piano and lifted her hands. Around her, the children and adults waited for her cue. She took a deep breath and smiled. "Let's begin," she whispered. The music started softly, a blend of strings, piano, and gentle drums. The notes rose slowly, weaving into something warm and powerful. It wasn't just a song. It was a memory, a promise, and a celebration all in one. The sound grew stronger. The audience could feel the emotion, the unity, the history, the heart behind every note. Some wiped their tears quietly. The whole hall was glowing with feeling. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was deep and heavy, the kind that only comes after something beautiful. Then suddenly the hall erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some shouted her name, but she didn't bow. She simply smiled and whispered to herself, that one was for him. After the concert, people surrounded her, thanking her for the experience. The mayor handed her a medal of appreciation, but she held it for only a moment before saying, "This belongs to everyone who played with me tonight. Music is not mine alone." The next day, her story appeared in newspapers again. The blind pianist who united a town through music. But she didn't read any of it. She spent the morning teaching her students as usual, laughing with them, correcting their mistakes, and encouraging them to keep going. Years passed. The girl grew older. But her heart never changed. The children she once taught grew up and became teachers themselves, carrying her lessons into new towns, new schools, and new hearts. Whenever someone asked them who taught them to play, they all said the same thing. She did. The girl who showed us that music isn't about seeing, it's about feeling. Her piano became old with time. The keys had lost their shine and the wood had faded. Yet she loved it more than ever. Every scratch, every mark told a story. Sometimes she would sit quietly and trace her fingers along it, remembering every moment that had brought her there. One afternoon, as the sun set and the sound of her students' laughter echoed outside, she sat down at her piano one last time. She began to play her father's favorite tune, the one he used to hum when she was a child. The notes flowed gently like a goodbye and a thank you at the same time. Her mother listened from the doorway, smiling with tears in her eyes. The music filled the room, soft and peaceful, as if the piano itself was breathing with her. When she finished, she rested her hands on the keys and whispered, "We did it." The next day, the children came to class as usual. They found the piano covered in flowers and on the bench, a small note written in her hand. It said, "Keep playing, even when no one listens. That's when music truly lives." The town mourned her deeply, but her legacy never faded. The music center remained open, run by her students and her mother. Every year, on the anniversary of her final concert, they gathered to play her songs, not in sadness, but in celebration. People who had never met her came just to listen, to feel the warmth she had left behind. The sound of her piano still echoed through the hall, reminding everyone that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from those who were once doubted. The girl who had once been mocked for touching a piano had become a symbol of courage, love, and the power of believing in yourself. Her story continued not in words, but in music, carried in the hearts of every person who ever played, listened, or dreamed because of her. And in the softest moments of night, when the town was quiet and the wind moved gently through the trees, it almost felt as if her music still played, somewhere unseen, somewhere endless, reminding the world that even in darkness there is always a song waiting to be heard.